Hello, everyone. Welcome to the second panel today. My name is Konrad Bielecki, and I'm the moderator of this panel, which is titled Discoursive Memory, Representation, and Symbolic Capital. Our first speaker today is Łukasz Lubicz-Łapiński from the Polish Nobility Association. He's a historian, genealogist, specializing in the regional history of the Mazovian Podlasie borderland. He obtained his PhD in the field of history, written dissertation on the social history of the families of the petty nobility of Podlasie in the 15th to 19th centuries. He is an author of several publications and studies on the nobility, landed gentry, and economic history of Podlasie, as well as over 20 historical exhibitions. He's also a member of the Association of Polish Nobility, initiator and the first president of the branch of the Association of Polish Nobility in Białystok in years 2004 to 2019, and also a chairman of the chairman of the Committee of Proofs of Nobility since 2008. Łukasz presentation is titled Representation of the Nobility in the Modern Day Poland. The floor is yours, please.
Thank you very much. In first part of my lecture, I will try to describe Polish nobility system and Polish nobility specifics, because as you know, in Poland we had a lot of noble families, and it was one of the highest numbers of noble families in Europe. Let me try if the presentation. Yes, okay. So nobility in Poland is a class of people existing in Kingdom of Poland, of course, till the partition, till the 1795, and also during the partitions, till the 1918. Finally, in 1921, feudal system and the nobility system finished with a constitution of March 1921. Nobility class was established as a result of transformation of knighthood into nobility. In 14th, 15th century, this class was slowly closing. And in 15th century, after union with Lithuania, also boyars and nobility of Grand Duchy of Lithuania joined to this transformation. So finally, this transformation ended, let's say, in Polish-Lithuanian Union in 1569 in Lublin, when all the families created a common nation, common system. A system of democracy. What is interesting and what is strange when Western Europe looks at our history, that about 8 to 10% Polish society had a nobility status. So when we know that in 17th, 18th century, it was 12 million of people, so that means that over 1 million people belong to the nobility status. It was quite similar to the Kingdom of Hungary, some districts in Spain, when also big percent of people belong to the nobility. What is interesting and what's not common in noble system is that there was no subclasses or ranks. All nobility were equal in law system. Of course, not equal in wealthy, but equal in low system. There was no higher nobility and lower nobility. Most titles were not recognized. Some titles of prince, kniaz were confirmed in Polish-Lithuanian Union in Lublin in 1569, but in all 16th century there was many protests against foreign titles, foreign noble titles. And what is also strange from the Western point of view, that there was no heraldry office. There was no any official office who registered that nobility, who tried to register coat of arms, all the titles. When there was some doubts about nobility, nobility had to be resolved during the trial in land court. We call it nagana szlachecka. Of course, nobility class was a society in the past was divided into three parts: nobility, townspeople, peasants. But Polish nobility were rather non-officially divided into some parts, some classes, but it wasn't a really class. It was rather wealthy status. Magnates, rich people with towns and cities and villages, medium nobility, usually with one village, and petty nobility. This part is in my research, also divided into smaller classes. Some of people from petty nobility, more wealthy, more lucky, could jump up to the medium nobility. Medium nobility could jump up to the magnates. We know such families, but also you could fall down from petty nobility to gołota, which means nobility without any land. What is also interesting, all the titles, Polish titles, lord and lady, belong to the all classes of nobility. Like I said, there was no classes or subtitles. That's why all nobility in Poland had a title of pan, pani, which is lord and lady. Sometimes they wrote a title as jego mość pani, his grace lord, her grace lady, and the same title of lord belong to the petty nobility and magnates. You can see at the text records from 17th century, it's a petty nobility of family Wojno from Wojno village. Many it's Podlasie region, many people in one village, and all the titles is jego mość pani and szlachetny pan, which means noble lord. In some period of time, of course, some titles were a little bit transformated. The lowest wealthy status was called nobilis, szlachetny, higher generosus, and the highest magnificis. But all the nobility had to use the same status. There was no difference in law between petty nobility and magnates, of course, theoretically. Like I said, there was no any official office, any official system till the end of 18th century. There was no heraldry like it was in England or Russia or other kingdoms, which tried to classify the nobility. At the end of 18th century, under the King Stanisław Poniatowski, when Parliament worked it's related with period of activities of Great Parliament and work of under the Constitution of 3rd May in years of 1788 and 92, when some regulations attempt to unify the system to verify political rights. In the name of new constitution, some part of nobility were their rights of their political rights were cancelled. It was a noble gołota, which means nobility without any land, any heritage, and the rest was taken in a land registry, where this registration of nobility in a system of voivodeships or districts began in 1791, but it was interrupted by Polish-Russian War in 1792. Only few such registries survived till the modern days. One of these is from Podlasie, from Drohicen district, from 1791, when we have lords of small village Czarnoty, mostly with Czarnocki surname. And news after the partition in 1795, Polish nobility was divided into 3 and finally into the 4 systems, 4 different systems. Prussian partition, Austrian partition, we call it Kingdom of Galicia, Russian partition, taken straight to the Russian heraldry system, and the part which in the beginning of 19th century was a Duchy of Warsaw, and next after the Congress in Vienna, we call it Kingdom of Poland, or rather Congress Kingdom of Poland, till the November and January uprising, self-independent state under the Russian crown. In those systems, Polish nobility was included in those 3 and 4 systems. And during the period, individual rules created separate instruments aimed to verifying rights to the numerous Polish nobility. Of course, most numerous privileges classes came under Russian Empire, when the institution of heraldry was established for the, we can try to ask the question, if a heraldry system, Russian heraldry or Kingdom of Poland system, was organization of lawful nobility. It's trying to get all this nobility in one system, to prepare all the laws and try to make a clear system, or just repression. In my opinion, most of law, especially law under the Kingdom of Poland in 1836, shows that that was a system of repression, because most of Polish nobility was a petty nobility. Over 90% of people was a typical nobility without a peasants. So, of course, in our imagination, a typical Polish nobleman is a guy with a big estate, a village full of peasants. And when we examine sources, tax records, and other historical sources, over 90% of noble people were mostly had a heritage without a peasants. In 1835, author Ross, in a book, The Perspective View of Poland, wrote such information. At least 60,000 families belong to this class, of which about 100 are wealthy and the rest is poor. Of course, maybe it's the difference and proportions are too big, but in the end of 19th century, Zygmunt Gloger, a Polish ethnographist and amateur historian, after examining the tax records in Podlasie, informed that over 11,000 noble estates were divided into two parts. 2,800 belongs to the 70 families of wealth nobility, and other 8,000 parts of smaller estates had 6,300 owners, nobility owners. That means that 75% of land, of nobility land in that voivodeship belonged to the petty nobility without peasants, and 25 land belonged to the wealthy nobility. In the numbers, it's 99% of poor petty nobility and less than 1% of wealthy nobility. Like I said, there was no low differences between both classes, mostly wealthy. That's why a Russian system divided nobility for confirmed nobility and non-confirmed. To confirm, to prove nobility, nobleman had to prove that he had a whole village as his heritage, or came from some orders or offices in old Polish times. Of course, most of Polish nobility couldn't prove that. That's why it's about 15 or 20% people, no noble people, was accepted by heraldry. Over 80% was out of the system. Such a situation was till the end of the Kingdom of Poland, which was there was a patents of nobility in some heraldry archives. You can find a very interesting genealogy tree, but as I said, that was only few percent of nobility he could afford for such a things. And the last system of nobility finished at 1918, after Poland regained independence. Nobility state was formally ended with proclamation of new republic, and like I said at the beginning of the constitution in 1921. There was the next part. However, there was some need to associate for economic and educational purposes, not only among landowners. I will tell about landowners. In 19th century, landowners created some associations like Agricultural Society or the Land Credit Society in 19th century. But in 19th century, many landowners, many noble estates just finished, and system of nobility, landlords, was changed from nobility system to the landed gentry system, and many of those estates were held by also non-nobility families. In the other side, there was many nobility without big estates and still not wealthy estates, especially at the southern eastern part of Poland. That's why in the 30s of 20th century, there was a need to associate such a people, such society, for economic and educational purposes. That's why just before the Second World War, Związek Szlachty Zagrodowej, let's say Association of Petty Nobility, was created. It started in 1935 with newspaper Wake Up, Pobudka, and with some government help, with some government acceptance, Association of Petty Nobility was established in Przemyśl. But as you know, these regions in 1939 war started, and this association was only for 2-3 years, and war before the war, in February 1939, there was 41,000 people belonging to the Podkarpackie Petty Nobility Association, and members were organized in 450 branches. So it was quite big organization. It was finished during the war, after the war, when the communistic system started. Of course, there was no place for such association like landowners movements or nobility movements. That's why it was a systemic enemy and had no rights to exist. That's why after the gaining independence, after 1989, one of the first modern day association associated with nobility members was Polskie Towarzystwo Ziemiańskie, Polish Landowners Association. Main difference between, of course, nobility associations is two things. Not all wealthy landowners were nobility, and not all nobility were wealthy landowners. That's the main difference between association of nobility. Another society connected with nobility is Sovereign Military Order of Malta. There is two classes. As you know, order still exists. There are some classes, and the higher classes of these orders member need to prove nobility in first classes and second class. But third class, over 90% of members of such a association, especially Association of Polish Knights of Malta, also are not noble knights. That's not noble membership, which is trying to opening for the wider perspective of association. And the third association is Polish Nobility Association, also established after the gaining independence, established in 1995. You can see the main goals, which some of them are just related with organize and integrate a community of noble families. And noble families is the only main here you have a fragment of status, which gives you information about categories of membership. And Polish Nobility Association is a typical association of nobility, because all three categories are connected with the Polish nobility system. First, nobleman of noblewoman, just like it was in first Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, in straight male line, recognized as a nobleman before the partition period. The second category is a nobleman's wife. It's also connected with the Polish law system, which was the same in the first kingdom. And the person having nobility recognized by the applicable. We don't have a time, so I will try to give some statistics about the Polish Nobility Association, especially when I'm working on sources and applications to the association. We've got over 500 families. I've tried to categorize 260 families for today's lecture. Most of families of 240, more than 19th century, is a category of immemorial nobility, which means that's nobility with proofs taken in the which taken in a medieval period. 5 ennoblement, 1 indigenate, it's a Sweden family, indigenate by King Stanisław Poniatowski, some foreign nobility and nobility of Congress Kingdom of Poland. Mostly sources of nobility are metrical records, supported by other sources like taxes records, court records. Most of people which took application to the Polish Nobility Association got also heraldry confirmation, but it's not so important for us. Our goal is to reach the genealogy and reach the roots of all the members till the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. You can see the map. Almost all the voivodeships, all the regions are represented in our association. And the final, all this information are taken to the database, which is open. You can find the family trees, historical sources in a free access. And then final, there is also CILAN, let's say that's a Commission of European Nobility Association. There are many associations all over the Europe. I hope that Polish Nobility Association will join this association as soon as we finish the work with our database, because like I said at the start, this association is a typical association of nobility and it can be only the one association taken to this commission. Of course, all the other associations are very tight related. We've got common members with Landowners Society, Maltan Society, society also of descendants of Great Parliament, other societies, also society of private families, clans, which also got members with Nobility Association. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And before I introduce you, our second speaker, I would like to encourage all the participants and listeners online to ask questions via chats on streaming platforms. So, our next guest, Rafał Smoczyński, is a sociologist and associate professor at the Institute of Philosophy and Sociology of the Polish Academy of Sciences. His research interest focuses on social control, political philosophy, sociology of elites, and his publications were included in Oxford University Press, the Gruyter, Ethnic and Racial Studies, East European Politics and Societies and Cultures, Current Sociology, and Theory and Society. Rafał Smoczyński was involved in research projects funded by, among others, European Commission, Research Council of Norway, National Sciences Center, and Visegrad Fund. He also acted as a visiting scholar at Monash University, the University of Portland, Seoul National University, London School of Economics, Fejérdy University, University of Ljubljana, Kanazawa University, and Northumbria University. And Rafał Smoczyński will present his speech online, and the title is The Reorganization of Polish Nobility, Post-Second World War, Strategies for Collective Identity Building. Rafał, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for this introduction. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you perfectly.
All right, cool. And how much time do I have? This 20 minutes?
20 minutes will be enough.
All right. So once more, I'm expressing my gratitude to be at this great conference. And the very idea of this presentation I'm going to give you in a while is about the capabilities of reproduction of contemporary communities, referring to the noble legacy in Poland. I will be drawing heavily in this regard on my previous research carried out mainly with Tomasz Zarycki over a few years back. And I will limit this presentation mainly to some, you may say, theoretical or methodological conclusions out of this specific line of research we've done with Tomasz. This will be a mainly exercise in Durkheimian studies in this regard, right? So I have a feeling that this classical line of sociological theory fits well to shed light in order to understand what we are dealing with in this particular community. Either we call it relic group or certain elite of feudal times. I feel that the Durkheimian studies give quite valuable insights to understand the very possibility of reproduction. This group, which is a post-feudal group in the modern world. So my presentation consists of three sections, you may say. I will give you a few introductory remarks first. Then I will turn into describing the contemporary field of Polish nobility. When I'm talking about field, I'm referring here to Pierre Bourdieu's. And I will describe two major actors existing within this field. Then I will turn into interpretative lines, these Durkheimian lines, and I will end up with conclusion. So, obviously, the communist revolution in Eastern Europe not only dismantled the material foundations important for the reproduction of noble networks, but also triggered long-lasting social changes that disrupted the rigid criteria for belonging to contemporary noble milieu. And one of the most significant of those was homogamy, as we know, yes, or marriages taking place within the noble group. As members of noble families, increasingly after the Second World War, started marry outside the group, the strict boundaries governing reproduction, once upheld by homogamy, gradually loosened. And today, the criteria for belonging to the analyzed major informal noble community no longer align with the traditional Polish patrilineal definition of legitimate nobility. We have to be aware about this. Because the contemporary informal milieu, which is the major actor, as you will see in a minute, includes members from matrilineal lineages and to lesser extent individuals without noble origins. So basically, to speak how to belong to the milieu, an individual must be recognized by others as connected through either continuous socialization or family ties. Another important thing to mention in this regard is that after World War II, with the loss of their economic assets, in this social capital became the noble milieu's remaining resources, the major resources. As a result, professions aligned with the intelligentsia became the most accessible for former landowners. Thus, the analyzed Polish noble milieu cannot be classified, and this is one of the findings we write with Thomas in our previous research, that we cannot classify this group as an autonomous class, according to the existing classical Weberian or Marxist classification. Rather, this group should be understood as a subgroup within the broader intelligentsia. And our research identified within this milieu significant resources of what can be termed intelligentsia-oriented cultural capital, including general erudition, knowledge of foreign languages, sophistic manners, and so on and so forth. And this form of cultural capital has enabled the noble milieu to function as a relatively autonomous subfield within the larger intelligentsia field, allowing it to survive the communist era by substituting lost economic capital and legal privileges with cultural and social capital. Okay. Our research also identified that there are still noticeable distinctions between these groups, the intelligentsia and this informal, mainly consisting of what we could. And the role of kin in primordial socializations are quite evident. So these are, in this sense, two different animal species when it comes down to family bonds, for instance. And to explore how the noble milieu is reproduced, given all these circumstances I've just mentioned, in modern Poland, this presentation applies mainly Durkheimian insights on moral communities. This is a Durkheimian category, moral community, with a focus on the role of social rituals in sustaining cohesion. These rituals, which infuse the community with moral forces, this is this category which Durkheim used to explain how the community are bounded, right? What keeps them together? He called it moral forces. And these moral forces are defined here as a series of relatively consistent sequences of performances and utterances that establish a group convention, forming the basis for the group's continued existence. And these community rituals of noble groups are obviously trivial from the observer point of view, yes? But they are far more, way more than simple physical gatherings when imbued with emotional significance so important for Durkheimian studies. He called this collective effervescence. These rituals generate certain social energies which are essential for maintaining the group's integrative potential. Now, what are the major actors within the noble field? The previous presentation to a certain extent gave us a hint. I will limit myself only to two major camps within this field. So actors drawing on noble legacy in contemporary Poland can be categorized generally into informal and institutionalized. And in the public spheres, organizations emerged after 1989, with the most notable being the Polish Nobility Association, just referred to by previous speaker, and the Polish Association of Landowners. And our biographical interviews we carried out some time ago with the former organization suggest that the most of their predecessors had largely abandoned the traditional gentry lifestyle, often well before the establishment of the Second Republic of Poland, yes, 1919, 1939, and rarely owned significant land estates in this period. Similarly, the ancestors of the latter organization typically held properties of insignificant material value, with some exceptions, obviously, during the Second Republic of Poland, and did not maintain close, and this is crucial, social ties with wealthier landowners during or after the Second World War. The integrative potential of the membership in these organizations remains relatively weak today. In contrast, the most cohesive group identified in this research is an informal milieu made up primarily of several dozen historical wealthy noble families whose members have upheld close kinship ties. This informal network plays a central role in sustaining the noble field in today's Poland. And unlike institutionalized groups, the integrative potential of this informal milieu is notably strong. Interestingly, this informal milieu does not label itself explicitly as a noble group. Yes. So while external observers may refer to them as nobility or whatever, such term is rarely, if ever, used by its members. Instead, they typically refer to themselves simply as family. And most individuals associated with this group are descendants of historical noble families from the First Republic of Poland, 1454-1795, for those who are not familiar with this period, and the Second Republic of Poland, who have established and maintained kinship relations over centuries. And membership in this group is not based on abstract genealogical criteria, but rather on physical presence at family events. And this is this Durkheimian moment. Not certain abstract knowledge, but very physical presence, interactions within a certain broader family-oriented field or kin-oriented field. Very feudal type of social activities. During these gatherings, individuals must be recognized, what is also important, as legitimate by other members to be fully integrated into this group. And these gatherings are governed by informal rules that shape members' bodily behavior. What otherwise is a typical situations of every informal groups, obviously, yes, such as dress code, modes of self-expression, the way they address relatives or outsiders, and so on. Yes? And this practices clearly also distinguish members from non-kin and safeguard the boundaries of this typical moral community. And one key indicator of belonging to this milieu is the primordial socialization of offspring within the kinship context. The strong bonding social capital within this group, like other moral communities, enable separation between the intimate family sphere and the outside world. And the strong integrative potential of this informal community stands in contrast to formal groups, these institutionalized groups I just mentioned, whose members lack the structural embeddedness in everyday life. Unlike the informal group, where members are deeply connected through repeated face-to-face interactions within a moral community, members of institutionalized organizations are not similarly embedded. After World War II, those affiliated with formal organizations were usually not part of kinship-oriented networks that could have more formed an alternative noble milieu comparable to the informal group. So we can say, paraphrasing Rodney Stark here, that we can assert that the durability of social integration is not demonstrated merely by individuals forming a corporate organization and self-identifying as noble, but rather when nobility is consistently ratified by a kin community across multiple generations. But the distinction between formal groups and informal milieu becomes analytically clearer through the lens of the neo-Durkheimian studies, which show how moral communities protect their members from anomie by fostering mutual trust and promoting the adherence to informal community norms. When viewed as a moral community, the informal groups shared beliefs, emotional and intimate face-to-face interactions, reverence for kin memories, and social distancing strategies towards outsiders help explain its resilience and ability to construct a protective barrier against disintegration over time. The group's cohesion relies on the regular performance of social rituals here, rather than on abstract knowledge of noble lineage. These rituals reproduce the habits and shared interpretative frameworks of the group, contributing to a cohesive lifestyle that mitigates potential conflicts, which always rise, as we know, among communities. And therefore, it is so important the primordial socialization here is. So even some members can have a certain superficial acquaintance, but still, given this early socialization, they can be elevated, they can be debilitated to some extent. So early socialization of children plays a critical role in this process, as it is during this time that various forms of embodied skills are produced, eventually becoming perceived as natural. Yes. And these skills are very difficult to acquire later in life, as we know, not only from this group, from any other groups. And they strengthen social capital within the group by enabling members to easily recognize one another and distinguish also outsiders, imposters, and so on, because these problems with imposters also happen in this field from time to time. And these practices echoes Rappaport's insights on ritual practice and the crucial distinctions between a congregation and an audience. A congregation, according to Rappaport, may consist of individuals who may or may not know one another, but all share a common familiarity with a ritualized order. This shared knowledge gives them confidence as performance within a certain symbolic space. In contrast, an audience observes these rituals as abstract phenomena without personal attachment or the sense that these rituals are doing something about the state of the world. And concluding this point and following this important Rappaport insights, we can view the informal group as representing a primordial social structure, defined by intimate kinship relations and shared embodied cultural capital. This includes a common lifestyle, family memories, expressive social rituals passed down over generations, and informal socializations practices within the kin milieu. On the other hand, members of institutional organizations, as our research demonstrates, embody a corporate social structure based on formal membership and diverse forms of embodied cultural capital shaped by heterogeneous environments. While the informal group is bound by active kinship networks, the formal organization in this regard function like a historical reenactment. And now comes conclusion. We can say generally that genealogical ties and historical identity, while important, and which is cherished, as we know, especially with this institutionalized group, serve only as a supplementary factors in legitimizing the privileged status of the informal milieu, which we recognized as the major actor in the noble field in contemporary Poland. The core of this status appears to be secured by the uninterrupted transgenerational reproduction of social rituals. In other words, what is missing in the case of institutionalist groups? So we can say that the high symbolic status and strong integration of the informal groups relies not solely on historical memory, but on the strength of living social capital bonds. And these bonds transform the group into the Durkheimian moral community, where ongoing kinship interactions reinforce its cohesion and distinction. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. So we can go to our third speaker, which is Sokol Lleshi from the University of New York, Tirana. He is an assistant professor of politics at the University of New York, Tirana, at the Department of Politics and International Relations. His research focuses on the role of memory politics in post-authoritarian regime legitimation, state socialism, cultural and political elites, and the effect of party organizational structures on political representation. His most recent publications have appeared in Routledge, Nomos, and European Politics and Society, also such research methods cases, Political Science and International Relations, and Stan Rzeczy, State of Affairs, Social Theory, East Central Europe. A lot of complicated titles. Okay, Sokol, your paper is titled Restorative Memory and Temporalities of Past Social Formation in the Absence of Historical Justice, Representation of Landowning Elites in Post-Communist Albania. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Actually, before I start, I wanted to share that I am very much indebted to the fascinating research of Anna Wilegala, Tomasz Zarycki, and Rafał Smoczyński. So I will try to present the case of Albania. Definitely, there is no association of nobility. There are no representations and living group as a social group. So how come when the nobility has already been, or actually the landed gentry, and has been already divested from particular economic and cultural capital during the communist dictatorship, and some of them have left the country, some have been executed or impoverished and placed in internment camps? How come we talk about their past? So the key research problem, in a way, it's what explains some degree of institutionalization of the social memory of the declassed political families. This is a local term in post-communist Albania, when the post-communist Albanian social formation is dominated by a ruling elite that comes from state socialist bureaucracy and the cultural intelligentsia educated during the communist dictatorship. Now, I want to introduce the term political families, which is actually a term designed by the communist regime immediately after the Second World War to classify and categorize those ex-ruling families of the interwar period that were either complicit in collaborating with the fascist regime or they belonged to an anti-communist ideology and tradition. And they were the ones to be imprisoned or the ones to be suffering from the violence of the communist takeover in 1944, 1945. I rely on the fieldwork at the Institute for the Studies of Communist Crimes and Consequences to start mimicking the other institutions in Eastern Central Europe to address the communist past. It was established in 2010, and the people who ran this institution are descendants of the interwar political elite. I've done semi-structured interviews with representatives of the Institute, and they have collected an oral history of testimonies of particularly this group. Their first goal was to collect the testimonies of those who survived the violence, survived the dictatorship, so presenting instances of repression. But then they decided that they should also focus on representations of a past social formation, that is the interwar Albania, because this is not discussed by other historians and because they want to present a particular representation and institutionalize this social memory into the institute that they are running. Okay, so post-communist field of power in Albania, there is a recognition of political opposition to the Party of Labour of Albania, or the Communist Party. They changed their name in the 50s. So there was the establishment of a pluralistic political field. Yet in the early 90s, 1991, they excluded the anti-communist political diaspora to contest the first elections, and also the political persecuted were not pardoned immediately once we have the establishment of a pluralistic political field. So there is an elite reproduction, the dominance of the state socialist culture and technocratic intelligentsia after 1990. Contentious issues of dealing with the legacy of the communist dictatorship. There are two key issues that were very controversial after the early 90s. The first is the restitution of confiscated property, which happened due to an agrarian reform in 1946 introduced by the communist regime. And the second is the extent of transitional justice mechanisms, whether we should focus on restoration, to what extent we can provide access to the archive of the state police, to what extent we can create a shared collective memory, including also the victims and particular groups within the political persecuted. Now, the leadership of the Democratic Party, although they professed an anti-communist ideology, they belong to the cultural intelligentsia of the socialist regime, and they emphasized initially in the early 90s the idea of complicity or co-responsibility in sustaining the dictatorship, and they also argued that each of us more or less equally suffered as citizens under the dictatorship. This was not accepted by the political persecuted associations, especially those coming from the political families. They assumed that this is quite similar to oblivion or forgetfulness, and they did not appreciate or did not consider this approach as real willingness to address the legacy of the dictatorship. The other issue was that the restitution of property, especially land, was sidelined, and the focus was on decollectivization. There was a common agreement between the Reformed Social Democratic Party coming from the Communist Party and the first opposition, the Democratic Party. They actually agreed that they should focus on decollectivization. But within the Democratic Party, the first opposition party established in December 1990, there were particular anti-communist factions, traditional anti-communist ideology, and basically they demanded property restitution, lustration, and retributive justice. However, this particular social group, especially the ones who were not state officials of the dictatorship that for particular reasons were purged from the party in certain consecutive waves, so the ones who were traditionally anti-communist, they had this established an ambiguous relationship with the center-right political elite. So they were the social base of the Democratic Party, and this sort of ambiguity gave them a possibility to be part of state policy on dealing with the past, and they were asked, descendants of this group were asked to lead the Institute for the Study of the Communist Crimes once it was established in 2010. There were particular measures of transitional justice, but they were quite politicized, and on the other hand, they were quite ineffective. So there was the verification law as a sort of lustration law in 1995. Strange enough, the more the regime was becoming more authoritarian in the mid-90s, the more it started to politicize issues of transitional justice. So they targeted categories of administrative and political offices. It was non-transparent. The State Commission was controlled by the Democratic Party, by the government. There was no official, proper institutionalized access to the secret police, Sigurimi. Then in 1995, later on that year, they established the genocide law, focusing on those high representatives of the past dictatorship, usually ex-members of the Politburo or ex-state prosecutor, but they did not actually probe into the role of the officials during the communist regime. So this was, again, an ineffective mechanism. In the early 90s, there was, and still yet, no shared collective remembrance recognizing the atrocities of the past regime. There was another attempt when the Democratic Party came to power since 2005 up to 2013 to initiate a lustration law, a kind of more cohesive, more comprehensive lustration law in 2008, but this was deemed unconstitutional by the Constitutional Court. So in a way to compensate for the lack of more instances of historical justice, they established in 2010 the Institute for the Studies of Communist Crimes and Consequences, which is led by descendants of the interwar social classes. Now, differentiation between or within the political persecuted social group. We have the declassed families whose members had served as state officials during the fascist and Nazi occupation. We have representatives and descendants of landed gentry divested from economic, political, and cultural capital immediately after 1945. And those who were politically persecuted because they opposed certain policies within the regime, or they suffered particular waves of purges. These do not belong to any anti-communist tradition. Actually, they have an anti-fascist tradition, but apparently they could pose a threat to the regime during that period. And actually, those that are coming from the political families do not recognize this, let's say, disenchanted Marxist or disenchanted communist as part of the political persecuted group. The class configuration of the pre-communist social formation and its field of power. Initially, while I was reviewing the literature, there was kind of a prevailing argument that basically in the Balkans, from late 19th century and early 20th century, the peasants replaced the indigenous feudal ruling class, and there was no indigenous feudal ruling class in the Balkans. However, the current literature emphasizes that in the post-independent Albania from 1912 and on, the landed gentry was the dominant class. Although members of the middle class intelligentsia did become the official ideologues of Italian rule, the fascist rule relied primarily on the pre-existing class of feudal landowners. The bourgeoisie was less significant because they emerged as a consequence of economic policies of the fascist regime. And the involvement of middle-class intelligentsia, especially in the early 20s, into a political and military rebellion, which is depicted by the communist regime as a democratic revolution. They wanted to radically transform the society through this particular movement or action, but apparently it proved ineffective, and it did not reduce the social and economic gap in the country. Well, what was the social base of the National Liberation Front, dominated by the Communist Party? Usually young people and landless peasants constituted the social base of the National Liberation Front. After 1945, the communists established immediately special tribunals to try those who collaborated with the Axis, but anyone who seemed opposed to the policies of the new communist government. Actually, the representatives and the descendants of the landed gentry and middle-class intelligentsia were labeled by the communists as political families. And now those who belong to these families nowadays accept this particular label. Restorative memory and culture past and descendants of the interwar ruling elite. I tried to come up with a few concepts that could address this particular puzzle when you don't have any material conditions of the continuity of the landed gentry, or even, if you want, bourgeois classes, but yet there is a discursive representation of their past or of their social formation in the interwar period. So in the Albanian public sphere, in the post-communist public sphere, members of the post-communist culture elite have determined the public debate, and the public sphere or the memory field is fractured or fragmented. The representation on the dictatorship and the suffering of the victims by the political persecuted can be conceived as a subaltern memory compared to the other representations, although they, to some extent, took advantage of their nomination into this particular institute within the bureaucratic field to represent their social memory. But they did not manage to make this particular social memory part of the collective remembrance of the country. So despite the establishment of this particular institute, it did not become the centralized authority within the bureaucratic field implicated in the state policy of dealing with the past. Key representatives of the institution, they faced a lot of obstacles to access the Sigurimi files, the state police files, even if they were granted this particular right by the founding law of the institution. What they did is that they focused primarily on two things. First, creating this encyclopedia of the victims without actually differentiating between different categories and groups who, for various reasons, social, ideological, or other reasons, suffered under the dictatorship. So they even included those party members or party officials who were demoted, or those who were actually purged during the communist dictatorship as part of this encyclopedia of the victims. Apart from this project, they realized that they could address historical issues and representations of past temporalities of the interwar period in Albania, which was not discussed in the public sphere. And they could do it through the testimonies of second-generation descendants of those landed gentry or state officials of the interwar period. So actually the law sets the limit, the temporal limits of what should be the focus of this institute. So the focus should be 1945 until 1991. But they don't consider this as important, or they think that to understand the dictatorship, you need to get back to the interwar period, and actually the dictatorship denaturalized the features and the morality or the social norms of the Albanian society, because according to them, the communist ideology was an alien ideology that was not possibly fitting within the cultural space or the cultural norms of the traditional Albanian society. Actually, there is this restorative memory of the pre-communist social formation conveyed through oral history and the generation transmission, initially with a kind of personal memory, but then it becomes institutionalized through the publications and the dissemination of this particular oral history by the Institute. The class descendants of the landed gentry did not have under the dictatorship any possibility for material conditions to reproduce any sort of social status. So they were either executed, or they left the country, or they were interned into very isolated places. They could do only manual jobs. So it was always a matter of survival, and under conditions of such kind of conditions, it was impossible to create a continuity as a particular social group. So their property was confiscated, their books, their artifacts, anything was confiscated, even stolen. So there was no materialized institutionalization of cultural capital. What they could do is that they could use a set of moral values that they considered as opposite to the ideology, the communist ideology, which they considered alien. And they talked about this family memory, and they transmitted this particular family memory. Of course, they lost all those skills or certain practices, but to some extent they managed to have this embodied form of cultural capital. But given the fact that there was no material conditions of replicating and sustaining their social status under the dictatorship, and even not restoring their social status after regime change, probably I would venture to argue that the notion of the culture past could be more appropriate, or could be perceived as more appropriate to understand such practices of representation for declassed communities. So under socialism, they were persecuted, experienced capital depreciation, divestment from economic and cultural capital. So they were not allowed to enroll in higher education institutions during the dictatorship. Neither did they achieve any recognition or neither did they participate in the field of power in the post-communist social formation. Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And last but not least, let me introduce you Gergely Fejérdy, who is a historian of diplomacy, university teacher, foreign affairs analyst, former diplomat, deputy director at the Otto von Habsburg Foundation in Budapest. He completed his secondary education in Budapest and pursued university studies also in Budapest, but among others in Pilisaba, Paris, Lyon, Leuven, and Fribourg in Switzerland, on the subject of history, French language, international relations, European studies, and theology. He received a degree in 2001 at the Faculty of Humanities and Social Sciences of Pazmany Péter Catholic University. In 2002, he gained a degree in European Communication in Lyon, and he was awarded a PhD summa cum laude in the history of modern international relations at Paris-Sorbonne University in 2009. He started his career at the Institute of History of mentioned Pazmany Péter Catholic University, and at the International Relations Department of Corvinus University of Budapest as an assistant professor and lecturer. From 2010, he has been working as a senior associate of the Hungarian Institute of International Affairs, as a France and European Union expert. Between 2013 and 2016, he was a lecturer of the Council of PPKE BTK School of History. Between 2015 and 2019, he worked as a diplomat at the Embassy of Hungary in Paris, and he is also a member of several Hungarian and European professional research groups, member of the Hungarian Academy of Sciences public body, and recipient of several French and Hungarian Science Awards. His speech today is titled Otto von Habsburg and Hungarian Noble Network. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, and dear colleagues. I hope that you hear me.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, I hope.
And see you.
Thank you very much. Super. First of all, I would like to thank you for the organizers for this conference. I'm honored to be here to give a presentation entitled Otto von Habsburg and the Hungarian Noble Networks. Let me talk about the networks of a former ruling family. After the First World War, the Habsburgs lost their influence, as we know, but the 800 years old family maintained and even built on its personal networks. I will not bore you with all the existing networks that the family had, but I would like to draw your attention to its relationship with the Hungarian nobility and elite. Moreover, I do not wish to deal with the whole family, but only with Otto von Habsburg-Lothringen, ancient crown prince of the Austro-Hungarian monarchy. As deputy director of the Otto von Habsburg Foundation in Budapest, I am in a privileged position because I have a good overview of the source preserved in our institution. In preparation for this lecture, I would like to share some of more important reflections which are intended to focus exclusively on the relationship between the Hungarian nobility, aristocracy, and Otto von Habsburg, but could well be explored in terms of its similar network with many other nations: Austrian, Czechs, Italians, French, Spanish, Belgian, and so on. The eldest son of the last monarch of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, Otto von Habsburg, was born in 1912, went from here to the throne to become, in 1979, member of the European Parliament and a well-known public figure. According to a prominent British historian, Martin Ready, who wrote a very good book, many good books, but one of them about the Habsburgs, he said, and I quote, "He was the best emperor that the Habsburgs never had." End of quotation. From a young age, Otto von Habsburg drew on the aristocratic and noble families of the former empire to support the dynasty's traditions. This intergenerational network of relations, from which Otto von Habsburg not only benefited, but also made efforts to maintain, played an important role in the promotion of the interests of the Danube Basin region of the former Austro-Hungarian Empire, and in the solidification and preservation of values, especially moral values of Europe. Drawing on the personal archival legacy of Otto von Habsburg, I would like to present some of the most important elements of the relationships with the Hungarian nobility, pointing out that in the 20th century, despite the drastic change in the historical scene, Hungarian historical families maintained their responsible role and close links with the former. Lost his father in 1922 when he was still young and was thus legally heir to the Hungarian throne. His return to Hungary was supported by a significant camp of legitimists, among whom were a number of prominent international figures, most of them aristocrats, with a wide network of contacts. Among them was the Count Albert Apponyi, who is, in addition to being a former president of the Inter-Parliamentary Union and politician of international renown, was for a long time their leader of the Hungarian legitimist camp, personally teaching Hungarian constitutional law to the Otto von Habsburg in exile and introducing him to the many Hungarian nobles. The Crown Prince was in constant contact with the Hungarian aristocratic families in the period between the two wars. As you know, the family and Otto von Habsburg himself lived in exile until 1960s in Switzerland, Portugal, Spain, Belgium, the United States, France, and in Germany. In the interwar period, his mother, Zita Bourbon-Parme, also played a significant role in establishing and cultivation this relationship. Among the clergy, all persons of noble birth also played an important role in Otto von Habsburg's network. Just take the Count János Mikes, Bishop of Szokály, which is a bishop of the western part of Hungary, with special relationship with his father, as well as with Otto von Habsburg. Otherwise, Otto von Habsburg could trust on such person as Count Gyula Andrássy, son of the former famous foreign minister of the monarchy in the 19th century. The younger Count József Károli, well-known Hungarian aristocrat, or Count József Hunyadi, or the Prince Elemér Lónyai, and his wife, the daughter of the King of Belgium, the widow of the former Crown Prince Rodolphe, Archduchess Stephanie. There are many other Hungarian aristocratic family, Esterházy, Zichy, Széchenyi, Szapáry, and so on, who were all connected to him and who, on several occasions, used their own contacts to inform and assist Otto von Habsburg, who was a refugee in Spain, Belgium, and France during the period, and then in the United States between 1940 and 44. From the 1930s, when the former heir to the throne became adult, visits by members of the Hungarian aristocracy became more frequent. Many of them were members of the parliament, Hungarian parliament, or members of the former Hungarian government. The Count János Zichy, the former minister for culture, who was his teacher before, was particularly important, the support for the crown prince. Also, the Count Sztáray and many others kept him regularly informed of the domestic political conditions in Hungary. During the World War, the Second World War, when he was forced to move to the United States, he also relied on members of the Hungarian aristocracy. Here, too, in the United States, he was assisted by, among others, Count Sztáray, who mediated between him and the government in Budapest. The head of the Hungarian government himself, Miklós Károly, before 1944, wished to establish contact with the former heir to the throne. Ferenc Keresztes Fischer, Minister for Interior, was instructed to contact Otto von Habsburg during the war. During these years, the Crown Prince worked with a number of members of the Hungarian elite, many of them of noble rank, including a number of diplomats. For example, at the Hungarian embassy in Lisbon, with the ambassador Andor Bodjáner and with Baron György Barca, the former head of the Hungarian foreign mission in London. Due to the German occupation of Hungary and the events of the war, existing relations very temporarily interrupted, but in many cases, they were re-established after the fighting. As is well known, in the Eastern European region, Nazism was followed by the takeover of the Soviet communist power, which within a few years led to the establishment of Stalinist dictatorships. Some of the Hungarian nobility immigrated to the West, while others were victims of persecution. Otto von Habsburg came into closer contact with those forced into emigration, and on more than one occasion required their help in informing himself politically. Thus, among others, he maintained close contact with the diplomat Baron György Bakács-Bessenyei, who played a significant role in the organization of the post-war Hungarian immigration and was a member of Hungarian National Committee established in the United States from 1948. The Baron Bakács-Bessenyei himself came from the noble family as well. Their correspondence shows with extraordinary diligence who important contact with Hungarian political refugees was for Otto von Habsburg and who they tried to help each other. It will be Baron György Bakács-Bessenyei who will ask the son of the former monarch to travel to Portugal and reconcile with Miklós Horthy, the former governor of Hungary. The former imperial admiral and aide-de-camp completely distanced himself from the Habsburg family after the Great War. Otto von Habsburg was willing to go to Lisbon to visit the former governor in exile after the Second World War, even though the former politician had shot at his father, King Charles of Austria, in 1921, because he wanted to reinforce the unity of Hungarian immigration against the communism. Baron György Bakancs-Besényi, who operated an extremely extensive network as chief foreign affairs envoy of the Hungarian National Commission, also regularly informed the Royal Archduke about Hungary and helped to build up the network. The role of Hungarian diplomats who were forced to resign during or after the Second World War was particularly significant for Otto von Habsburg's relations with Hungary. In Paris, for example, the Baron Antal Radvánszky and Paul Auer were important contacts. The former Hungarian ambassador in Brussels, István Hédry, who was also a member of the Order of Malta in the 1950s, looked to Otto von Habsburg for instruction and advice on who best to serve the interest of Hungary and Europe. Otto von Habsburg suggested that he should settle in the United States because from there he could effectively help anti-communist efforts. For more than a decade until his death in 1966, Etienne Hédry kept Otto von Habsburg regularly informed of political events and expanded the Crown Prince's already extensive circles of American contacts. Another important contact for the former heir to the throne on the Western Atlantic was Adam Tarnóci, who was an important figure in the Hungarian-American Catholic League until his death in 1997. Otto von Habsburg also maintained friendly relations with other persons in the United States. Noteworthy among them was Tibor Eckhardt, a Hungarian nobleman and former smallholder politician. In the wake of the 1960s revolution, they mutually supported each other's plans to help refugees. Among the Hungarian diplomats who immigrated to the West, Pál Hevesi, Baron Pál Hevesi, who lived to very old age, was in regular contact with Otto von Habsburg as well as the Baron Gábor Apor, who was the Chancellor of the Sovereign Military Order of Malta in Rome between 1952 to 1958. Otto von Habsburg was in contact with a number of Hungarian personalities in the Eternal City in Rome, including Gyula Magyari, a papal prelate who played a significant role in his father's beatification trial and who had been a close friend of the family since his childhood. He was also member of the Order of Malta since 1953. Among the Hungarian diplomats with whom Otto von Habsburg maintained particularly close relation is essentially to mention Ferenc Marosi, who used his well-known name from the time he was awarded the Order of the Kinghood in 1936, and who took over the leadership of Hungarian embassy in Madrid as refugee in 1946. The former heir to the throne, so Otto von Habsburg, could always count on his excellent Spanish connections. In 1952, Otto von Habsburg's participation in the Eucharistic Congress in Barcelona was a major achievement for Marosi. In 1956, during the Hungarian Revolution, the former Crown Prince managed to have a significant influence on events thanks to help the Hungarian diplomat, for example, by putting the Hungarian cause on the agenda of the United Nations General Assembly. Otto von Habsburg also tried to maintain and expand his contacts with the Hungarian aristocracy and constantly monitored the situation of the former nobility behind the Iron Curtain, even raising his voice against persecution. It was no coincidence that his name was often included in the communist window dressing of the time. For example, the Cardinal Mindszenty trial, and which Prince Paul Esterházy was the fourth defendant. Among Otto von Habsburg's Hungarian aristocratic connection, we can mention, without claiming completeness, the Count Albert Apponyi's son, György Apponyi, the Count Batthyány, members of the Count and Count Hadik family, Széchenyi Pallavicini, or even the diplomat Count Móricz Csikandzicsi, who was also an important contact for Otto von Habsburg. For example, Count János Esterházy, not a politician of the same name from the sadly fated Galanta branch, but distant relative, briefly served as the special secretary to him in the early 1960s. The former Crown Prince says more distant relatives who were members of the Hungarian nobility were also important contacts. For example, Count Franz Meran and the Hungarian Archduke Joseph August Habsburg and his descendants also played a significant role in the Otto von Habsburg's connections. The former Hungarian noble families also considered it important for their social status to be in contact with the former dynasty. In this respect, the wedding of Otto von Habsburg in Nancy in France in 1951 was a very interesting and spectacular event where the former heir to the throne was surrounded mostly by refugee members of the former Hungarian noble families. It is clearly visible in the photographs taken at this event. It is therefore important to underline that this was not only Otto von Habsburg who needed to network of Hungarian noble families, but this was also true in reverse. For the noble families too, the connection with Otto von Habsburg was important. The noble families also supported the son of the last monarch of the Austro-Hungarian Empire financially in the period between the two wars, and then mainly through their information and their contacts. The Hungarian state regularly supported the family of the Habsburg family from the glory of the Habsburg's personal fortune. During and especially after the Second World War, Otto von Habsburg himself, a foreign policy analyst, leader of the pan-European movement, and later a member of the European Parliament, attached the great importance to information gathered and passed on to him by the Hungarian nobility and the support of friends. On more than one occasion, he also asked for their concrete political help, such as during the 1956 revolution. From the end of 1960s, as international relations as he was able to contact some members of the former noble families remaining in Hungary indirectly, but it was only in the late 1980s, and especially during the change of regime, that he was able to do so personally. In the 1980s, for example, Baron Vilmos Gergely, who was a banker at that time in London, for help him arranging for him to visit Hungary, at least incognito. It was only in 1987, under strict condition, that this plan could be implemented for the first time. Otto von Habsburg's good relations with the Hungarian nobility and the anti-communist elite during the Cold War were well known to the Communist State Security Service, and thousands of pages of documents in the Budapest State Security Archives are trace of this. After 1990, Otto von Habsburg also contacted descendants of the surviving noble families. The Archduke died in 2011, giving him another 2 decades to contact these families. Numerous letters were also sent to the former monarch during this period. These are in the archives of our foundation in Budapest. It is therefore interesting to see that the links that were served during the Second World War have not been completely cut, but have, of course, been re-established in completely new form after. It was very attentive to the network of relationships that crossed the generations. We can still see this today because I personally work a lot with his son, Georg von Habsburg-Lothringen, and I can see that he continues to keep his father's network alive. Allow me to bring up, before conclude, another topic. In my presentation, I'm essentially examining to the chronology of the Otto von Habsburg's relations with the Hungarian aristocracy, but also touch very briefly on the question of the nobility and the elite. It is also important to show that Hungarian elite is not only the old, usually rich and influential nobility who can trace their family tree back several centuries, but my interpretation is wider than that. I also want to draw attention to the members of the former elite under the leadership of Otto von Habsburg transcended national borders and played an important role in keeping the unity of the Danube Basin and Europe alive, even in the darkest years of the Second World War and the Cold War. From the above, it is clear that even the network of elites of bygone eras can remain an important factor in later historical periods. Through exploration of this issue, by examining other networks and the intersections may shed light on interesting connections.
We didn't hear you.
Gergely, sorry.
Yeah.
It's okay now?
Yeah, it is okay. So I suppose we get
so just,
conclusions, yes?
Yes, that was the conclusion. I just say that it is a very important perspective to work about these questions about the elites and aristocracy and elites and dynasties, which are this relation between them. And thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Gergely, Fejérdy, and thank to all our panelists for a very interesting and inspiring papers. Before I open the discussion, I'd like to turn things over to our discussant, Eva Sztáray Kézdy, who is a sociologist and lawyer, University Associate Professor and Head of Institute of Social and Communication Sciences at Károli Gáspár University of the Reformed Church in Hungary. Eva's main research areas are sociology of elite based on descent, former aristocracy and gentry, sociology of values, sociology of families, active fatherhood, stay-at-home fatherhood, caring masculinity, qualitative social science research methods like interview, focus group, and text analysis. The title of her doctoral dissertation is Descendants of Former Aristocratic Families in Today's Hungary. So, now it's time for your commentary to our panelists, please.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you. We can hear you very
Okay.
good, and we can see you also.
Okay, thank you very much. First of all, I would like to thank you for making it possible to join online the conference. It's a great honor to me. And I also would like to express my congratulations to the organizers for the professional preparation and management of this remarkable conference. The four presentations we just heard were very different, but they were linked by the common question of how to preserve or rebuild collective identity in totally changed circumstances after decades in which the former elite of origin were proclaimed as the main enemies of the system. The first lecture approached this question from an organizational perspective, the second with a sociological, theoretical focus, and the third one from more political, historical perspective, and the fourth one with a network approach. So I will give my comments one by one, and I would like to address specific questions to each speakers, but I look at the time and I don't want to take time away from the audience questions. So first I turn to Professor Lubicz-Łapiński. Thank you very much for your very comprehensive presentation of the communities and organizations that refer in their activities to the heritage of the Polish nobility. And thank you very much also for the clear conceptualization of Polish nobility from a historical perspective. As you mentioned Hungary, I may make some similarities between the two cases, the two countries. In Hungary also, we can observe an increased interest in family history and family roots after the system change, and associations were formed to collect people with some same noble origin, so it's very similar. But in Hungary, we saw that these associations were not so attractive for the younger generation. But in the recent years, there has been some changes in the presidency of one of them, and they try to attract more the younger generation. So the first question I have is it the same in the Polish society, or are they more attractive for the younger generation? And also I have another question to you. At the end of your presentation, you showed very shortly a map of with some proportions, but I couldn't see it very well. Can you repeat, please, again, what proportion of the total noble population is represented by the organizations you described? And another question, what can we know about how many of the nobles emigrated after the communists took over the power? And do you have any idea about the proportion of emigrated noble people who returned to Poland after the change of regime, and whether they play any particular role in this associations, and are they integrated into the population, noble population of those who remained at home? And now I turn to Professor Rafał Smoczyński. I listened with particular interest your presentation because you know I have studied the survival strategies of Hungarian aristocratic families with a similar research focus as you had, and we have already had the opportunity to exchange our experiences. Of course, there are a number of similarities between the two cases. Among these, I would like to highlight the status of the nobility and aristocracy, and also the effort to pass it on through the generations and in significantly changed circumstances. I have also found that general erudition, as you mentioned, acquiring a diploma or knowing foreign languages or a good manner, and also Christian and family-centric values played a very important role in the education in aristocratic families, and it helped them to survive the communist era and partly reproduce the lost status. In Hungary, we could also distinguish an informal noble milieu from some formal organizations collecting members with noble or historical descent. But in Hungary, members really overlap and tend to reinforce each other in preserving identity and maintaining the network. So I think it's differences between the Hungarian and Polish case, and also an important disparity is the matrimonial hegemony, homogamy observed among nobles in Poland, in contrast to the Hungarian case. And at the end, I would like to ask you, what do you think? What role does the formal nobility play in the Polish society today? Do they play any special or significant role in political, cultural, or economic life? Or are they simply a subgroup, as you mentioned, within the broader intelligentsia? And now I turn to Sokol Lleshi. Thank you very much for this very, very informative presentation on post-communist Albania and the former landowning elite. As we know, the history and social structure of Albania is quite different from that of Central and Western European societies. That is why the comparison with the Polish nobility is very instructive. I would like to highlight just one of the many pieces of information you gave us. I found very interesting the finding that, I quote, the memory of the atrocities of the past has not become part of the collective remembrance of the post-communist social formation, and the former persecuted elite considered the attempt at reconciliation an actual strategy of oblivion and forgetfulness. It was very interesting and very similar to the Hungarian nobility's assessment of, for example, of the Hungarian Compensation Act in 1990. For example, one representative of the aristocracy made the point that this law definitely legalized the expropriation of the formal elite in Hungary. So for me, it was very interesting to hear the similar perception. And my question is to you, that I imagine that the grand majority of the landed gentry left the country after the communist takeover. Maybe you can confirm this. And is it possible to know what proportion of the former landowning elite returned to Albania after the regime change, and whether there is a noble milieu in Albania as in other Central European countries? Because we know that Leka, the Prince of Albania, settled down in Albania, has a special network of members of descendants of former persecuted elite organized around him, or he's alone in the society. And now I turn to Professor Gergely Fejérdy. Thank you very much for your speech, which is based on a profound and extensive archival research. Thank you very much. I would like to highlight some interesting information. I found it very interesting when you talked about Otto von Habsburg's desire to meet the former governor, Miklos Horthy, in Portugal. Horthy was not, as we know, not a supporter of the Habsburg dynasty. Did this meeting finally take place? Because you didn't mention it. And you also mentioned that Otto von Habsburg's good relation with the Hungarian nobility and the anti-communist elite during the Cold War were well known to the communist state security services. And my question is, in this regard, do we know anything about the nobles in Hungary with whom Otto was in contact? Whether anything happened to them, whether they suffered any atrocities as a result of this network or connection? And finally, if I have a short question, we know that in Hungary, the perception of the Habsburg Empire, of the Habsburg dynasty is very divisive. And I would like to ask you, as a researcher and deputy academic director of the Otto von Habsburg Foundation, how do you see Hungarian society's attitudes towards the former aristocracy and the Habsburg family? So.
Thank you very much for your comments and questions. We are slightly late, but don't worry about it. My proposition is our panelists will answer briefly for the first round questions from Eva, Sztáray, Kézdy, and then I will open the discussion, and probably we will steal a few minutes from our half-hour break, if you don't mind. So please, let's answer in the proper order. So starting from you.
Hear me? Yes. Thank you for the questions. About the question for association and youth people connections. Of course, such associations connected with heritage, knowledge, roots are usually we think about such a things when we are much older, right? So young people are not so interested in that heritage. I think in our association, I can see that mostly genealogy is some kind of thing which young people wants to join the association because of the knowledge about the genealogy, and which is in modern days more popular. So genealogy is one of these things, and another is a specific of organization when all families belongs to the association. So when the father got kids, so the kids is the next generation which usually send application for the membership. I think that there is a much more similar problems and similarities between Poland and Hungary. One of them, as you noticed, was a number of noble families, which in Poland and Kingdom of Hungary was quite high, especially in some comitates at the eastern parts of our country. In Poland, in Hungary, biggest amounts of noble families were settled just in the borders. So I think in Hungary, if I remember it right, some comitates at the eastern part of Hungary, Székely, in today it's Romania and Transylvania, eastern part of Transylvania, when a big part of Hungarian minority still is. We've got the same problem. Your question about migration and after the Second World War and communistic period is also a little bit similar to the Hungarian resettlement after 1918, after big part of Hungary was after the partition of Hungary, when some part of Hungary were taken to the new Slovakia country, Romania, and other countries, as those people, Hungarian minority, stayed there, and the same situation was in Poland after the Second World War. When you ask about that map, on that map we can see that there are some areas of in Poland when Polish nobility was in biggest amounts. It's also borderland, so our eastern terrains, which after the Second World War was taken by Stalin to the Soviet Union, many of people, and especially noble families, stayed there. It's in Vilnius region, Belarus, and some part of today's Ukraine. Of course, it's hard to say in numbers, but after the Second World War, about 1 million, 1.5 million Polish citizens changed the borders and decided to go to the new communistic Poland, which was extended to the west by a post-German territory. We can see some people, some noble families from Vilnius, Belarus region in today's Gdańsk, some later more noble families in today Wrocław. It's hard to say in numbers, but of course there was a very big movement after the Second World War. Probably some of those people, after gaining independence, when the Soviet Union collapsed, some of families rejoined other families and went to Poland after 1891, but still there are many families near the Vilnius, near the Grodno in Belarus, and other territories. Polish people and noble families stay there on their motherland.
Thank you. It is Rafał Smoczyński turn, I suppose. Rafał, can you? Oh, yeah.
Thank you.
Here you are.
Thank you, Eva, for asking this important question. And most importantly, great to see you again, since we last see each other ages ago in the Budel Castle, as I remember. But turning into the merit of your question, the first thing is about the social relevance of the contemporary nobility in the Polish life, public life, as I understand. It hasn't addressed this question, so we can only speculate about this. Actually, it follows for and it begs for a proper scientific inquiry to answer this. As we know, there has been at least one example of this type of studies carried out in the Netherlands by Professor Dronkers, who did it in a rigorously exercised quantitative manner. And he demonstrated that the Dutch aristocracy actually plays certain significant role in exposed positions in the political sphere, business, and so forth. The similar design of research hasn't been so far done in Poland. So I would skip this because it is only, we could see, of course, here and there, but this is an anecdotal value of this evidence. So doesn't offers any certainty. But in symbolical terms, since what you mentioned, the specific interrelations between the contemporary historical higher nobility or aristocracy, if you will, and intelligentsia, we may say, again, returning to the Durkheimian map of categories, there is a certain totemic function, obviously, of this milieu for certain status gains exercised among the intelligentsia members. Given the saturation of the Polish history with the feudal traits, features, it is still a relatively efficient symbolic resource to be used for the status games exercised particularly by the elite of the Polish intelligentsia. Yes? So in this sense, it is still socially relevant. But in order to find out whether there are any specific positions, ranks in the politics here and there, this would require a further empirical inquiry. Maybe somebody will do this one day. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Sokol, Lleshi, you would like to answer?
Thank you for your questions. I will start with the second question, whether the king or the descendant of the King Zog actually was encircled with representatives of the nobility or the landed gentry. Actually, the actual king of the interwar period, who proclaimed himself first president and then monarch, fabricated or created instrumentally some sort of genealogy to trace back his royal representation to Skanderbeg, to the Middle Age period. So he was not actually recognized as a proper monarch and king by other monarchies, traditional monarchies in Europe. Of course, his royal family managed to have and to become educated in good manners and all this sort of socialization process. During his reign in the interwar period, King Zog relied primarily on the southern landowners, the landed gentry in the south, and the chief towns of the northern tribal areas. Whereas King Leka II, I don't think that he is any longer interlinked with any sort of noble milieu, so there is no nobility milieu in the country. When it comes to those political diasporas or representatives of the landed gentry who left the country after 1944 or 1945, I'm not quite sure whether they returned back to get involved into politics, but they might have returned to obtain as much as possible part of their expropriated and confiscated property after 1990. And there are some instances of those, but they are no longer part of the ruling elite of the country. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Gergely, Fejérdy.
Thank you.
Yes, so thank you for the questions. For the first question, I can say that Otto von Habsburg went to Portugal and tried to reconcile with Horthy, the governor. Unfortunately, the governor refused to be truly reconciled, arguing for his own right, according to the reports that we have in our foundation about this meeting. But my answer is simple. Otto did go to Portugal. For the second one, the second question, I can say that Otto von Habsburg was fully informed about what's happened to the nobles' families in Hungary behind the Iron Curtains. He had many contacts with different personalities who have relations with them. And after 1955, with the Austrian state treaty, travel between the two countries became a little bit easier, and he had access to a lot of fresh information from the people who lived in Hungary. He used as well the diplomatic way, so the Western diplomats were very good the very good informations about this question. So he was very good informed about the situation behind the Iron Curtain. And the third question, the Habsburg family, and the Hungarian population, I think the Habsburg family continued to divide the Hungarian society. We receive message in our foundation that illustrate this question, this problematic. But I should note, however, that Otto von Habsburg is surrounded by a general respect, as if it is interesting that he's the good knowledge of Hungarian and the fact of that he songs with the Hungarians, for example, the commemoration events in March, the 50th of March, several times in Hungary. You know, the 50th of March commemorated the freedoms fighting during the 19th century against the Habsburg. It was something that Otto von Habsburg is a really very sympathetic personality for everyone in Hungary. So I can say that the division against the Habsburgs is there, but Otto von Habsburg occupies a special place.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you very much for all the answers. I think we can make a room for 2 or 3 questions from the audience, but I must inform you that we are 9 minutes late. So it is up to you if you prefer to ask your question now or maybe do it during the coffee break. The next panel will start 4:30. So after this small information, I open the discussion, please. Our convener, Anna wylegała. Okay, so we probably use another microphone. Yes.
Sorry for that, but I think that a good panel deserves questions and not asked during the coffee break. And especially if people made it to Warsaw, they should be asked questions. So I have one question and one comment.
I agree with you totally. So
a quick question and a quick comment. Okay, so a quick comment, short question to Sokol Lleshi. It was absolutely fascinating to hear how much the situation in the memory, politics and landscape was different in Albania than from what was happening in Poland in the 90s. And I want to ask you about this Institute for the Investigation of the Communist Crimes and Consequences, if I remember the name correctly. So you mentioned that it was dominated or run by the descendants of these political families. So my question would be, does it mean that it is a public institution informally dominated by people coming from one social group, or is it an institution that is not part of this state administration? And then what is the status and how much power actually this institution has? And a very quick comment to Łukasz, Lubicz-Łapiński. You mentioned that part of the nobles from the eastern borderlands remained after 1945 and rejoined their families after the fall of the communism. It might be correct for Belarus and Lithuania, but for sure it wasn't correct for Eastern Galicia. I mean, I don't know any single documented case of a, maybe not a nobleman, but a landowner, owner of the estate, coming from the landed gentry, who would stay, of the Polish ethnicity, who would stay in Eastern Galicia after 1939 or for 41, because whoever was not killed or deported left for Poland, for communist Poland in 1945. So it was not the case. It was not that for Ukraine.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. I think you can answer right now. So the first question, please.
Thank you very much for the question. This particular institution is mimicking other institutions in Central Europe, like the one in Czech Republic or Slovakia, etc. It is understaffed, right? Then how come that the key representatives derive from descendants of the political family? It is because they align ideologically with the center-right, dominant center-right party, with the anti-communist ideology. So the Democratic Party, although sociologically belongs to ex-cultural elite of state socialism, they rhetorically profess this anti-communist ideology. And this ambiguous relation between the politically persecuted of anti-communist tradition and persuasion with the Democratic Party enabled them to become key representatives of the institution. It is not a diverse institution. It does not involve representatives from politically persecuted people that basically suffered under consecutive purges or because they defied the regime and conformism of socialist regime per se. And actually this is the reason why they emphasize the fact that to understand the dictatorship we need to get back to the interwar period and they create their own representation which is also political, although they claim that it has been part of this strategy of forgetfulness and oblivion, which is also true. Right, have I answered the question? Yeah, okay. Thank you.
And thank you for the question. Of course, you're right that the situation on Ukraine is totally different because of UPA massacre and Ukrainian nationalist actions in 1943. Of course, most of people escaped from the villages and they escaped from the eastern part of Poland and to the new Poland even in 1933-1944 in these years. But some of the people and some of noble families escaped to the biggest cities. We've got members of association from Odessa, Lwów and Żytomierz. And of course you are right that they couldn't stay in their home villages, but some of people tried to escape and try to hide before Ukrainian nationalists in biggest cities. So there is a big society, Polish society in Żytomierz, Łódzk, Lwów and Odessa, and we've got some members from Ukraine and they stayed there, but of course not in their original villages, but in biggest cities when they could hide. Mm-hmm.
Follow-up question? Yes, Zilke.
Sorry for asking another question, but Mr. Fejérdy will not join the coffee break, so I will ask just now. It was very interesting for me to hear something on the network of Otto von Habsburg and the Hungarian aristocracy. And I would like to ask Mr. Fejérdy if he still listens, when we think vice versa and ask which was Hungary for Otto von Habsburg. He was important for Hungarian nobility or Hungarian aristocracy, but he had a widespread network. And what was can one compare or characterize his relationship to Hungarian nobility? You know the sources best.
Yes, if I understand well, your question is about the what was Hungary in the head of Otto, or in the heart of Otto von Habsburg. I think for the Habsburgs, after the First World War, it was really very important, Hungary, which was always a kingdom between the two war period. And otherwise, to be king of Hungary, it was very important, how do we say, a very important thing. It was more than 1,000 years old kingdom of Hungary. And his father was really very attached to Hungary. And, Otto von Habsburg was always, during his life, during his 99 years, when he was alive, he always wanted to did that his father couldn't do because of his death in 1922. So for Otto von Habsburg, Hungary was really very important. But you are right, it is very difficult in the case of Otto von Habsburg to put a hierarchy. He was very well connected all over Europe, just because he was in connection, family connection with many other countries. But always Hungary was very important for him, and it is very important that he speaks very well in Hungarian, and he was interested in Hungary always during his time. It was always Austria and Hungary, which was the more important for him, but he had many other relations, of course, in Europe, with the other countries. So Hungary was really very important for him, not only for the nobility, but all in the Hungarian situation.
Okay, thank you very much. Do we have any? Yeah, the next question.
Good panels deserve questions. My question is to Łukasz Lubicz-Łapiński. I know you as an expert in history of Podlasie gentry. My name is Marta Kurkowska, which should mean something. I'm from Podlasie, but the question is rather tricky, I suppose. Would you please briefly elaborate on how the Podlasie gentry or landowners fared economically in the mid-war period, and if this is a topic today for the members of the association? Is it any sort of concern or topic for discussion?
Mm-hmm. Can you repeat the question?
How they manage economically, how the landowners of this particular part, because I rely on your expert knowledge, in mid-war period, already in the 20s and 30s, and if this is anything for discussion today.
That's depend on the if we are talking about the petty nobility or big landowners. Yeah, there was no big landowners before the war. Most of landowners and the estates collapsed in 19th century or after the First World War. There are a few estates which couldn't exist after the First World War. Destroyed their houses or buildings, especially in the eastern Mazovian part near Łomża, Drozdowo. Some estates of Kisielnicki family were split into smaller parts. So landowners has a tough time in the 19th and beginning of 20th century, and also petty nobility also. At the end of 19th century, in demographic we have a demographic transformation when the villages were full of small kids, and the mortality rate was very also small. So most of villages were very crowded, and estates of petty nobility, and the second class of nobility, estates of petty nobility were also split into smaller parts, and this period between First and Second World War was very tough for the petty nobility. I think it's a good topic for the study.
Okay, thank you very much. And the last question from the gentleman over here. And I have good information for you, because I was convinced by my colleague who had noticed that you probably need more than 5 minutes of break. So I think we will meet 10 minutes later, so 16:40, and have 15 minutes for the break. Please, your question.
Yes, thank you. I have a question for Dr. Fejérdy. I would like to ask you about the relationship between Otto von Habsburg and his family, and nobilities of other countries that historically formed the empire, the Habsburg Empire. For example, Czech Republic, Croatia, and also Poland, because as far as I know, in the interwar Poland, in the Second Polish Republic, actually there was no evident pro-Habsburg sentiment, even though actually some Habsburgs lived in Poland, in the territory of Poland, and they were intermarried with Polish families, Polish aristocratic families. So I am just curious what was Otto von Habsburg's attitude towards these elites or former elites of these other parts, integral parts of his patrimony. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the question. Otto von Habsburg has many relations, of course, with the other parts of the ancient monarchy. So he had many relations with the noble personalities, aristocracy for the Czech part. He had a very good relation with several Czech aristocrats. The Croatia it's of course very important for him. We know that after the war, after the 1990, when the Yugoslavian war was in place, he was one of the personality, like deputy of the European Parliament, who went to Croatia with some of his ancient personality as well, noble personality as well. So with the different nationalities of the ancient monarchy, he was in very good relations, and the nobility. It's very curious, but with Poland, we have some correspondence in our archives, but it's a very short correspondence. Some of aristocrats are in relation with Otto von Habsburg, but only of the part of the south part of Poland, around Cracovia and so on. And it was not the most important relation of Otto von Habsburg. It could be very interesting for us as well to see further which were the real relations between Poland and Otto von Habsburg, because, for instance, we have not many documents in our foundation about this, but in the ancient monarchy we have many examples with the relation with the Austrian, the Czechish, with the Croatian nobility. So it is there. So it's not especially only with the Hungarians with whom he was in good relations.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank all of you, our panelists, our audience, for a very interesting papers, presentations, and discussion. And now I'm announcing almost 15 minutes coffee break. So.